Okay, we'll restart now. To give you some idea of the importance of Octopus, there is always a question on the final exam about Octopus. That's why it's important. And I haven't decided yet whether the assignment will involve Octopus, but it has in the past sometimes, and it might this year. Because Octopus is an example of a kind of a total payment system. It's got everything going on in it. And one disadvantage we have is that a lot of the details of it are secret because they don't want people attacking the system. And there have been various efforts. In one case, there was some degree of success with it. I can tell you about that. But it wasn't because any of the cryptography was cracked. It was an insider job done by people who actually had access to parts that go into the Octopus readers. And they did stuff, and they got caught. And they're still in jail. Okay. So some stats. As of November of last year, 33 million Octopi cards had been issued. I guess Octopus cards. 99% of the population in Hong Kong between age 15 and 64 has an Octopus card. Lots and lots of really old people don't, and infants don't. But 15 to 64, 99%. There are 75,000 readers in Hong Kong. There are over 9,000 service providers who accept Octopus. And those 9,000 service providers have 20,000 retail outlets. And in one retail outlet, of course, there can be more than one reader. There are plenty of them. If you go into a store with many point-of-sale positions, there's going to be a different reader at every one of those. It handles, on average, 14 million transactions per day, 162 per second, but that's averaged over the 24-hour period. Obviously, during rush hour in the MTR, there are a total of more than 162 transactions per second. If you consider all the MTR turnstiles all over Hong Kong, it's much more than that on peak. But on average, like in the middle of the night, if you average that out, it's 162 per second. The total amount of money that's spent on by Octopus cards is about 69 billion Hong Kong per year. That's not actually a huge number in the payment world. But you understand that they're used for relatively low-value transactions. Very low, Star Ferry and stuff like that. You can have personalized cards. I don't have one. I don't have a Hong Kong bank account. 1.7 million people have signed up for automatic add value to their card. And there are 20 banks that will provide the service of automatic top-up. And if you're an Octopus freak or a watch freak, you can put as many Octopus watches on your wrists as you want to. So I don't wear watches, so otherwise I would have one. The way it all started was a joint venture in 1994 was created called Creative Star. And it was formed by what were then at the time the 5 major public transport operators who didn't necessarily like each other. But if you had to have a different payment mechanism for each bus line and a different payment mechanism for the MTR and a different payment mechanism for the KCR, then you'd be carrying around 5 different things all the time, and you'd lose them, and it would be a real mess. So they got together and they said it's going to be better for all of us if we standardize on a single card that will be accepted by all the transit operators. So they launched Octopus in September 1997, kind of a handover thing, you might imagine. And it was renamed Octopus Cards Limited, OCL, ultimately. And it became classified by the HKMA as a deposit-taking institution in the year 2000, reflecting the reality that it is a deposit-taking institution. When you go to the add value machine and you put money on the card, you've made a deposit into Octopus Cards Limited. And they owe you either money or services for that. Just like a bank. When you put $500 in the bank, they owe you the $500. So they're a deposit-taking company. It operates in Hong Kong, Macau, and Shenzhen. There are separate Octopus systems in Dubai, the Netherlands, and New Zealand, in Auckland. But they're not mutually interoperable. You cannot use your Hong Kong card in Dubai. There's a separate Dubai Octopus card. Okay? Now, here are the operating characteristics. Transaction time, when they put out a request for proposal, they got bids from various manufacturers who wanted to manufacture these millions of cards. And they said the transaction time has to be less than 300 milliseconds for a transit application. It doesn't have to be that fast for a department store point-of-sale terminal. Why? because you're standing there at the counter, they're wrapping up your goods. It doesn't have to be 0.3 of a second. If it took 3 seconds, it would be fine. But if it took 3 seconds in the MTR, that would be a disaster. That'd be 10 times as much time as it takes now. It would mean you'd have to stop. Every time somebody went through the turnstile, you'd have to stop and wait. 1, 2, 3. Then go. And the next person, 1, 2, 3. In Hong Kong, people are in such a rush, people would be dead. They would kill each other. 3 seconds? Get out of my way. Okay? So they knew that. And they specified 300 milliseconds for transit. Where did they come up with that number? Why isn't it 100? Why isn't it 500? Here's why. Nobody knows this. Your professor goes to the ends of the earth to find out useful information for you in this course. And if you want to find out stuff about octopus, it's really not easy because they try to keep it secret. All right. It turns out, and you can try this experiment. I did it the other day. I do it every year to make sure it still works. When you go to the MTR, if you walk at normal speed, like this, don't run. Running won't work. But if you walk at normal speed, you never have to stop. Because when you present this to the Octopus card reader, if you keep walking, it takes more than 300 milliseconds for you to get to the gate. The gate will already be open by the time you get there. Now, most people don't do that. They go like this, and they stop, and they put it like that. You're slowing everybody down by doing that. You don't have to stop. You really don't. But really, don't run. Otherwise, a real mess will occur. Okay? Don't run. Just go like this, and don't stop walking. And you'll see, you'll always get through the turnstile if it's a transit application. Okay? Transaction fees are quite low. Hong Kong, 2 cents per transaction, plus 0.75% of the value of the transaction. So a $10 transaction costs 0.095. Okay? It costs 9.5 cents, which is a 0.95% fee. Okay? Much less than credit cards. The lifetime of an Octopus card is about 10,000 transactions. You know the applications because you live here. Don't have to tell you what they are. The interesting question should be on your mind. I want you to think about 2 questions for the next hour. Question number 1 is, when you use an Octopus card, how does the service provider who rendered service to you actually get the money? They can't get it off the card. That's not money. They want real money in their bank account so they can pay their employees. They don't want Octopus credits or whatever. Okay? So that's question 1 you should be thinking about. How does the money get to the service providers? The second thing I want you to be thinking about is, if you were a hacker or a thief and you wanted to defeat the Octopus system, what could you do to defeat it? To get an arbitrary amount of money, or to get free services, or buy food all over town without ever having to load your card? Try to think of hacks to try to penetrate the system. And we'll see what defenses there are that prevent you from doing that. There are loads of them. And nobody's ever been able to successfully do it. And it's been around since 1997. Okay. Octopus. Here's how it works. This card is manufactured, the Octopus card is manufactured by Sony. It's called a Felica card. F-E-L-I-C-A. That's Sony's trade name for this technology. There are other systems that use Felica cards. Octopus is only one of them. This has an I/O speed of about double the average of a chip card. 211 kilobits per second. Much more than you need for the small amount of data that's being transmitted. The antenna and the control board, this is what sits in the, this is right what you would be under the Octopus logo in a store or in the MTR. So when you put your card down, there's an antenna right under it. That antenna is connected to a circuit board. That circuit board is connected to a processor. In the MTR, all of the turnstiles in the station are connected to a master processor. The master processor is connected to an MTR regional processor. It's all real-time stuff going on. Now, the processing on the card is actually completed in about 1/10 of a second. But there's other stuff that has to be done. Data has to be written to disk drives that are in the MTR station. And that takes a little time. But the actual processing, even though 300 milliseconds was allowed, only 100 milliseconds is actually occupied by doing that. Now, what happens first is the card has to be detected. Remember, the reader is constantly pinging. Very fast. Ping, 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 ping. It's waiting to see if a card comes. When it detects a card, then it has to do something different. It has to authenticate the card. It has to determine that what you put on there is a real Octopus card that was issued by Octopus Cards Limited and wasn't manufactured in a hacker's basement. It has to do that. For your protection, your card, and this is amazing to me still, even though I've been teaching about it for a while, the card authenticates the reader. The card determines that it is talking to a legitimate Felica reader that's operated by Octopus Cards Limited. This prevents me, for example, from going up to you with a radio wand and going near your wallet and altering the contents of your Octopus card. Because if I try to do it, I will not be able to authenticate myself to the card. Oh, the card can authenticate itself to me. I know you've got a legitimate Octopus card. But your Octopus card will not spill its guts. It will not talk to anybody that is not a legitimate Octopus reader. Now, this is amazing because remember, this thing has what's on there? There's not even a battery on there. And so something amazing is going on between this card and this reader, so they mutually authenticate each other. Then there's a data read-write cycle where if you get onto the MTR, first of all, it determines whether there's a certain minimum amount on your card. So if there's nothing on your card, the turnstile won't open, for example. And it makes a note on your card of what station you got on. They don't know how much to charge you now because they don't know where you're going to get off. Okay? But when you get off and you go through again, then in this data read-write cycle, what it's going to read is the point of entry into the MTR. The turnstile knows where it is. There's a fare table that it consults to determine how much to deduct from your card. And so there's data on the card that gets modified during this read-write cycle. Oh, there's much more than that. The card stores the last 10 transactions that you engaged in also, as it turns out. Okay? Now, the operating distance is supposed to be 15 centimeters. I find in practice you have to get closer than that. And 15 centimeters is about that much, right? Won't read. You got to get down there. Okay. It's able to do a triple DES encryption or decryption in 70 microseconds. That's very fast. The processing time, the card spends 50 milliseconds processing. Out of the 300 milliseconds overall that's allowed for the transaction, only 50 milliseconds is actually wasted on the card. It has 1,536 bytes of double EEPROM. That's the stuff that gets rewritten every time you go through the turnstile. There's a 128-byte data backup area. This is also a clever thing. You know, when you write to memory, you don't write correctly 100% of the time. There are errors, especially depending on the distance between you and the reader. Suppose there's radio interference during the transmission. One bit gets changed to a 0 bit. The card might not record properly where you got on the MTR. If it doesn't record that properly, it won't know how much fare to charge you when you exit, and it won't let you exit. To prevent that from happening, there's a separate data backup area in which the same information is stored somewhere else. It's read again and stored again. And so if there's any problem with reading this, it just goes to the data backup area, so you won't be stopped on the way out of the station. There's a 16-byte manufacturer ID in the card and a 16-byte issuer ID, in addition to an individual serial number for each card. It has random access memory, and it has something called cyclic files, which for you data structure fanatics, you probably never heard of a cyclic file. It's not one of the data structures that's taught about in data structure courses because it has limited use. This is what a cyclic file looks like. It looks like a donut, and it has a bunch of records. And data goes in here. And every time you insert a new piece of data, the thing rotates. I mean, it doesn't physically rotate, right? Logically rotates. So if this was position 0, then after something is written into it, it becomes position 1. And something's written there. So the data, you can think of the data as migrating. So that if I put A in here, the A will move around and be replaced by other things. Okay? It doesn't stay A in all of them. It's replaced by whatever came in. So if I send in the sequence A, B, C, D, then this will end up as B, C, D. And if I put E in, then this will be E, D, C, B, etc. But when you get back here, data vanishes. It's erased. And so this is the data structure that the Octopus card uses for storing the last 10 transactions. It has a cyclic file that has capacity 10. And so it just keeps stuffing the stuff into the data structure, and only the most recent 10 things stay there. It's cute. You know, somebody had a computer science brain when they did that. I already told you about the anti-collision protocol. It's not confused if you put multiple cards at it at the same time. It individually talks to each one of them. All right. Now, the yellow circle on this slide indicates an encryption. So here is your card, and here's the reader in the MTR. Everything that goes back and forth between the card and the reader, even though it's this distance, it's all encrypted. And the reason it's encrypted is we don't want Eve planting a radio receiver on the side of the turnstile and recording all of the dialogues that occur between the cards and the reader. She could do that, but we want to make sure she can't make any use of that information. And so it's encrypted in a way that even if she receives that dialogue, she can't do anything with it. Then, when the reader sends data to the station controller in the, wherever the headquarters of the station is, that's also encrypted. Even though that goes over a LAN, it's not wireless, goes over a local area network, it's encrypted. When the controller sends the stuff up to the master MTR host computer, that's all encrypted also. So any hacker who's tapping into any of this stuff is not getting anything useful. Okay. Now, the mutual authentication, whereby the reader determines that it's talking to a real Octopus card, and, to me, the monstrous part is the card is able to determine that it's talking to a legitimate Octopus reader, is something called the 3 paths protocol. It's the Felica mutual authentication protocol. To me, it's brilliant. I mean, I've been in the computer science field for a really long time. And every once in a while, something comes along that really surprises me that somebody thought of it. And this is it. Okay? We're going to go through this in detail so you understand completely how it works. This is the reader over here on the left, beginning with the letters R, R, R. Okay? This is the card over here. Okay? Now, what happens is the reader, when it detects a card, it picks a random nonce, generates a random number. That's all, a long random number, typically 128 bits. That random number, RR, capital R, little r, is the random number of the reader. It encrypts the nonce, this random number, and sends it encrypted to the card. So it encrypts it and sends it to the card. The card has to decrypt it. And I'll show you how that happens. It decrypts it and it gets RR. So now they both have RR. Now the card encrypts the nonce, the different key, and sends it back to the reader. The reader decrypts it and sees if it gets the same number that it sent. If so, then this must be a legitimate card, because only legitimate cards know how to do the decryption and the encryption. Hackers don't know that. Okay? Now, the reader knows that the card is legitimate. Now the card picks a random nonce, RC, the random number of the card. It encrypts it, sends it over to the reader. The reader decrypts it, then encrypts it again with a different key and sends it back to the card, which decrypts it. If the card gets the same number that it sent, then it knows that the reader was legitimate, because nobody else knows how to do that other than a legitimate Octopus card reader. It's total mutual authentication, and it's happening really fast because, right, you're walking. And it's got to do the whole thing before you get to the actual gate. That's why it's important for it to be able to do a triple DES encryption and decryption in 70 microseconds. because it's doing a bunch of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 triple DES encryption-decryption cycles are taking place in less than 50 milliseconds on the card. Okay? Now, that's just the authentication part. There's still a lot of data to be transmitted, like where you got on and how much is left on your card and how much should be subtracted from your card. You don't want non-legitimate readers subtracting money from your card. So how do they then communicate? It's beautiful. From then on, they simply use the nonce RC as a symmetric encryption key. That's all. It's a nonce, right? It's never going to be used again. And so even if Eve gets it somehow, it's of no use because it's never going to be used again. And so all the rest of the data that's exchanged between the card and the reader is encrypted with nonce RC, and both of them have it. The card generated it, and the reader figured out what it was. It's lovely. What I haven't told you, though, is there's some complexity to this, because how does the reader know what encryption key the card used? Because every card is going to use a different one. You have to have that, because if every card used the same key, and if that ever got compromised, the whole system would collapse, because then you would know you would be able to fake anything with any card. So everybody's key is different. Well, if everybody's key is different, then how does the reader figure out what the encryption key was so it can do this decryption? The answer is that it looks at the serial number on the card, and there's an algorithm by which it can generate the encryption key of the card based on the card's serial number. And that algorithm is known to the readers, and it's built into hardware. That's how it's done. Okay? So here's the card. Here's the reader. The first thing that happens is the reader says, send me the ID of your card. The card sends back the ID. Then the reader generates the card's key, KK. I guess that's KK. I can barely read it. KX? What is that? K. I can't even read it on here. Can you read it on the is it KX or KK? Anyway, whatever it is. Let's call it KK for a second. It generates the card's key from the ID using a preset algorithm that it knows. So now it knows what key. Okay? And then what it does is it asks the card to generate a random number. The card generates a random number. Then the reader generates a random number. And there are triple DES encryptions of these things concatenated with each other. It's not done separately like on the previous slide. But these things get concatenated together and sent back and forth. And because the card, the reader knows the key of the card, now the question is, how does the card know how to decrypt what it gets from the reader? And the answer is that the reader generates a random number and a random session key and encrypts that using KX. So it uses the same key to do that, so that the card already knows that key. That key never gets transmitted between the two of them. So even if Eve is listening to everything, she can never figure out what the key is. All right. The cards are made by Sony. The firmware for an Octopus reader and card consists of 160 separate software modules. So imagine the difficulty. If, let's suppose Sony makes these cards in Japan, and they ship them to Hong Kong, and they get hijacked. And now somebody has a truckload of Octopus cards. Real, legitimate Octopus cards that were manufactured by Sony. They're not fake. How do we prevent them from doing anything useful with those cards? The answer is that the only thing that's on the card is a digest of the firmware, a hash function of the firmware, and a shipment key. Those are built into the card at manufacture. Now, the shipment key is sent to the authorized recipient, Octopus Cards Limited, and something called a key rewriting package. They're sent electronically to Octopus using pretty good privacy, PGP. They're sent out of band. So there's the truck that's coming with the cards, and then all this other data is coming over the internet, encrypted. Octopus, when they receive the cards, they then use the rewriting package to check that the firmware on the card has not been altered, because there's a hash function of it on there. And they create a new key that now Octopus is the only one who knows. Sony doesn't even know it anymore, because the key rewriting package changes the key. So an insider in Sony can't figure out what the key is on these cards. There's a different transaction key used for each transaction. I showed you that. That's the nonce that gets created by the card. That's different for every transaction. Purchases are tracked even if they're anonymous. So even though my Octopus card is an anonymous one, they don't know it's me. But they know every transaction that card has been through because there's a serial number on it. The system has never been penetrated. The system has been faked out by people who actually constructed a legitimate Octopus card reader out of real Octopus card parts, because they worked for Octopus and their job was maintaining the readers. And so they made a machine, and they used the machine to add value to cards without putting any cash in. And they did this over a multi-month period. And the police knew what was going on, but they had to collect enough data on the thieves to make sure that when it was presented in court that they would be convicted. They actually know about this in one day. They can always tell. And I'll show you why they can always tell. If somebody manages to penetrate the system, one day and it's over. They're going to know. Okay? You can also get an Octopus mobile SIM. Do any of you have that? Do you have the mobile Octopus SIM card in your phone? No? Oh, you ought to go get it. You really should. I'm not sure I can get it, because I think you might have to have a Hong Kong bank account. Okay, online Octopus. I recommend all of you students of electronic payment systems purchase the Octopus PC reader. 168 Hong Kong for this. Has a USB port. Okay? I'm going to plug it into the USB port of my machine. Okay? And what we're going to do is I'm going to go to, where are we? Right here. There's a web page at octopus.com.hk that is one-stop convenience to manage your Octopus transactions online. Transaction record checking. Okay? Let's check latest transactions. Hope it works. Yeah. Don't worry, it's going to work. It worked yesterday. Yes, I want to run this application. Transaction record checking. There we go. Those are the last 10 transactions that I engaged in with this Octopus card. And you can see I did an add value a little while ago. On the way over here, just to show you that there would be an add value transaction, I added $50 to the card. You can see that I took the Star Ferry today at 11:50, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all MTR rides. But if I used it somewhere else other than the MTR, it would tell you where I used it. Okay? Now, that information is stored solely on the well, it's also stored at Octopus Cards Limited. But this reader is only reading my card. It's not accessing a database back at Octopus. So all this information is on the card. And the cyclic file, as soon as I engage in another transaction, the one that's farthest away in the past will be deleted. It just won't be there anymore. It just drops into what we used to call the bit bucket. And then you can print this if you want. I'm not going to bother to print it, but you can click print and you'll print it. So cute, huh? Check transactions. There's also a free Android Octopus app. Oh, let's give that a try. So I happen to have here an Android phone. It's mine. I happen to have, well, to show you this, let's visualize. No, I'm not going to install now. No, please, do not install now. It'll take a long time, it'll waste the battery, and we'll never get out of here tonight. For some reason, it doesn't get out of here. Ah. For some reason, it's not detecting my finger here. You got to be kidding me. Stop. There we go. Wonderful. Got it. Okay. Now, we go to the Octopus app. There you go. To sign on to the Wi-Fi network. Okay, you can see that. I say inquiry. Tap your Octopus. Put your Octopus at the NFC area of your mobile device until transaction information is shown. That's on the back. If you have a Samsung device, it's on the back. So I lift this up, I put that, and there you go. Your cell phone can, you don't have to go to the check value machine. You can just use your own phone to let you know how much you have left. And there's the whole transaction record. There's the same $50 ad fare, remaining value 183.8. Last reload date was today. Now, a question I have asked in the past on some final exams is, if all this protocol is so secret, then how come they're willing to sell this thing, which you would think a hacker would be able to open this up and find out everything that this thing is doing and dump whatever's on the chip in here and figure out the whole 3 paths protocol and ruin everything? And so why would they be willing to do this? And how can they possibly have an Octopus app on a cell phone? There are millions of these things around. Anybody, it's free. Anybody can download the Octopus app. So you can think about that if you want. There we go. Back in business. Okay. Octopus on buses. Buses are interesting because unlike the MTR station, which can have a direct local area network connection to a processor, and that processor can have a direct wired connection to Octopus Cards Limited, you can't really do that so easily on buses because buses don't have that permanent connection. And furthermore, the bus can go into a tunnel, and it can't even communicate wirelessly so easily with Octopus Cards Limited. So there's a different mechanism that's used for particularly minibuses. Basically what they do, and what about the Coke machine? Coke machine takes Octopus, right? Coke machine is not directly connected to the Octopus clearing system. So those are batched. And when the Coke machine gets refilled, the transactions are downloaded and they're eventually recorded at Octopus Cards Limited. Now, when you buy a Coke, of course, the amount on your card is immediately reduced. So you can't keep buying Cokes until the clearing period. That won't work because eventually your balance will go to 0. But Octopus doesn't know the balance on your card when you buy a Coke. They don't know the transaction happened yet. When you go in the MTR, they know immediately because there's an online connection between the turnstile all the way up to OCL. So what they're trying to do is maintain what's referred to as a shadow account. A shadow account is a ledger at Octopus Cards Limited that believes it knows how much is on your card. And if you always use online Octopus readers like MTR, then it always does know. But if you occasionally use offline ones like the Coke machine or a minibus, then Octopus is kind of wrong. It just doesn't exactly know how much is on the card until the next time you use it in a real online situation, in which case it learns. So if you buy a lot of Cokes, your balance will go down. The next time you go in the MTR, your new balance is reported to Octopus Cards Limited. And so the shadow account becomes correct at that point. So the shadow account can vary from the real, it's never higher. It can be lower than the amount that Octopus thinks that you have. But they eventually get reconciled. Now that is a critically important thing in discovering frauds, as I'll show you. You know, you can use these for access control. There are a lot of apartment buildings that will accept your Octopus card. That's pretty good. As long as you don't lose your card, you know that they can't be forged. There aren't any counterfeit Octopus cards. All right. Now we're ready to answer the question, how does the service provider get paid? When you go into the MTR and you add value to your Octopus card, you put cash into a machine in an MTR station. Whose money is that? What happens to that cash? Does it belong to the MTR? You may never ride the MTR, ever. You may go into the station, add value, and then go buy cakes around town. So it can't be the MTR's money. Well, who else is there? There's Octopus. When you add value to the card, it becomes Octopus's money. The MTR owes Octopus the total of all of the fare that's added in add value machines in the MTR stations. How does Octopus know how much that is? Because they all have an online connection directly to Octopus Cards Limited. So when I put the $50 in at 5:25 p.m. today, Octopus immediately knew that MTR owes it $50 because there's a fare machine sitting there that has that cash in it. Okay? Now, of course, you know, every day Octopus Cards Limited is going to owe the MTR a lot of money. And it's going to owe them the money for every ride everybody took on an Octopus card. And so, of course, OCL knows that too, because every time you take a ride, fare is deducted, and that's immediately reported to Octopus Cards Limited, which knows it owes that much, less the transaction fee. It owes that much to the MTR. Now, of course, there isn't a settlement every time somebody takes a ride. I mean, it's right, 162 per second. We're not going to do 162 settlements per second. So what happens is there's a clearing. So all of these outfits that take Octopus cards, add value machines, fare gates, minibuses, retail stores, Coke machines, etc. They are all ultimately connected to Octopus Cards Limited. They may not be connected at the moment, like Coke machines aren't. But the MTR, they're connected directly to the service provider central computer. After they go through the station, they go to the MTR's central computer. The MTR's central computer reports the transactions to the Octopus clearinghouse system. So all day long, 162 times per second, the clearing system is taking account of, is this provider going to owe me money because he has an add value machine? Or am I going to go owe him money because he provided cakes to somebody? Okay? Now, the offline ones, so buses actually do wireless communication, but Coke machines don't. Coke machines, when they get refilled, the guy who refills them sticks a USB connection into the Coke machine, and all the Octopus transactions are offloaded onto the machine. And it does active processing. There's a disaster recovery site that's fiber optically connected to the clearinghouse system, so every transaction is instantaneously replicated at a place far away from the original computer. So in case there's an explosion here, they're not out of business. Can you imagine if the clearing system went down? Well, what are they going to do for that? How are they going to pay the MTR for that day? It would be really bad. Okay, now here's how settlement works. So here are the fare gates. These are the service provider central computers, and this is the clearinghouse system. CCHS is the central clearinghouse system for Octopus. Octopus clears, which means it determines who's got to pay them, the people who took fare money and who didn't provide as much service as the fare money they took. They have to pay Octopus. And Octopus has to pay everybody else who has a net positive balance, who gave out more service than cash that they collected. Settlement is through a system called HSBC Hexagon. HSBC Hexagon is a business-to-business payment system run by HSBC. All of the service providers have Hexagon accounts, and load agents that accept cash and update Octopus cards, they all have Hexagon accounts. Octopus has a separate bank which has several accounts in it, a regular Octopus account, a buffer account, and a reserve account. In case this one gets depleted, for example, they go into the buffer account because they have to make payments every day to their service providers, otherwise the system will collapse. And HSBC Hexagon handles all of this. It is usually not necessary to go through the central bank. The reason for that is if everybody has accounts in HSBC, then HSBC can handle it just by moving money internally within HSBC. Now, of course, the central bank will get involved. The reason it gets involved is what happens to all that cash? Huge amounts of money are added through add value machines every day. Somebody has to open up those machines, take out the cash. And what are they going to do with it? They're going to deposit it in their bank. What does the bank do with it? The bank sends it back to the central bank because they want their account in the central bank to be raised. So the central bank does get involved, but they're not involved directly in the settlement of Octopus transactions. All right. So here, there's a lot that goes on at the turnstile. We already talked about the mutual authentication of the turnstile recognizing a legitimate card and the card recognizing a legitimate turnstile. There's also a blacklist checking. So there's a blacklist in every reader. The blacklist is a list of the serial number of those cards that are not to be honored. Why would you not honor a card? Let's suppose you have a personalized Octopus card and you lose it. You tell Octopus about it, they'll put your card on the blacklist so that if somebody picks it up, he won't be able to get anything out of it. Okay? It updates the card with the new balance. It stores the transaction that it just engaged in, and then opens the gate and lets you pass through. At the next level, the station computer distributes software and data to these, like the blacklist is got to come from somewhere. It's going to come from the station computer into the individual fare readers. It collects the transactions, prints reports on how the station is doing, and sends data to the service provider central computer. So MTR has one, the service providers have them. The MTR central computer is then going to print reports and route data to the clearinghouse system. And then from then on, the clearinghouse system is going to validate the data and do netting, figuring out how much everybody's owed or is owed or will pay. And then settlement occurs. So the way it works in Shenzhen is the systems are not exactly interoperable. But the tagline for this system is one country, two systems. I know, it's a joke. It's funny. When you have a card that's usable in Shenzhen, at least until recently, there were two chips in there. There was the Shenzhen chip and the Hong Kong chip. So even though it was one card and it looked to you like they were interoperable, they weren't actually interoperable. Because the folks in Shenzhen don't know the algorithm for obtaining the keys for the Hong Kong system, and the Hong Kong guys don't know the Shenzhen system. Okay. So I have here for you a comparison of payment methods that we've talked about so far. This is the type of payment. This is the advantages of it and disadvantages. Cash. Cash is anonymous, which a lot of people think is an advantage, like criminals. That's why it's used for drug transactions, because it's supposedly not traceable. The legal authorities do not think it's an advantage, but it's very tough for them to get away from it. Cash is universal, at least within a given country. You can use it for anything. And it's sort of free in the sense that there's no transaction cost to you or the merchant when you use cash. If you owe him $100 and you pay him $100, you pay $100 and he gets exactly $100. Doesn't cost him anything. There's no fee. Credit cards. Credit cards are almost universal in the sense that almost everybody has them and almost every merchant accepts them. But there's a high transaction cost and there's a lot of fraud and forgery. As you know, in identity theft, if people get your credit card number, they can get online and they can charge stuff. It's a little tougher because they have to also know the CVV. I was asked this question during the break. So if you have a credit card, then on the back, printed is a 3-digit number. That came with the card. That's not on the front, and it's not on the magnetic stripe. So when it's swiped, the merchant doesn't get it. Okay? Well, the merchant doesn't need it because he sees your card. It's a legitimate card. But if I go onto the internet and I buy something from a merchant and I type the credit card number and the expiration date, how do they know I'm holding the card? I might have gotten somehow your credit card number, and I'm pretending to be you, and I'm typing the numbers. But if I don't actually have the card, then I can't see those numbers that are on the back, and therefore that prevents some fraud, which means that if I steal your credit card physically, then I'll get everything. But if all I do is decrypt a communication between you and the merchant, and all I'm going to get is your card number and the expiration date, that's not going to be enough for me to buy something over the internet. So it's an anti-fraud mechanism. The CVV, card verification value, is not the same thing as the PVV. The PVV is on the magnetic stripe. The CVV is not on the magnetic stripe. The PVV you don't have to keep secret because nobody can do anything with it. The CVV, you don't want people to know that because if they also know your credit card number, they can buy stuff online. So there's a lot of fraud in credit card transactions. One mechanism of fraud is simply denying that you engaged in the transaction. I didn't buy that. I got the bill, but I never bought that. Now, for things that are physically delivered to your house, there's usually some courier like UPS or FedEx or DHL or somebody that has a record that they delivered the box to your house. But if it's software, it's delivered to you over the internet, how does the merchant prove that you got it? I mean, there are ways, but it's not as easy. So there's a lot of fraud by people who simply refuse to pay the bill, claiming they never got the goods. Electronic funds transfer, point of sale. Direct access to cash is beneficial. So these are like debit cards. Debit cards, as much money as you have in your bank account, you can use instantaneously at a merchant. So you have access to all your cash. The problem is those transactions must be online. That is, at the moment of the transaction, there has to be a real-time connection to your bank. Otherwise, it cannot be verified that you have that much money in your account. Disposable smart cards. Disposable smart cards like phone cards, for example, which after they're used, you throw them away. You don't throw away your Octopus card just because its balance goes low. You refill it. They're fast and private. There's a risk of loss, though. If you lose the card, you lose all the money. But it's limited to small amounts, so you're not going to go broke if you lose a telephone card. You're just going to lose a small number of dollars. The personalized smart card has a very long useful life. It has security built into it, but it's not anonymous because the serial number of the card is tied to your identity. Unlike My Octopus card, which is really anonymous, if you have a personalized one, then Octopus Cards Limited knows everything you bought, or at least they know where you bought it and how much you paid for it. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about Octopus? Let me give you a scenario. Let's suppose that some hacker, however he does it, he figures out how to add value to an Octopus card without actually having to put money in an add value machine. He hacks the card so that he can, anytime he wants, as the balance goes down, like he buys things, he comes home and he adds another $100 to it, and the next day goes out and buys $100 worth of stuff, and then keeps adding. Let's suppose that could happen. Even with all this security, some really clever hacker might figure out how to do that. Will he get caught, and if so, how? The answer is yes, he will get caught. And furthermore, we will know the serial number of his card, because every card has one. Even the fake ones, they're going to have to have one. And what's going to happen? The next time, once we figure out that that card is a fraud, the next time he tries to use it at a service provider, we're going to know the exact place and time that that card was used. And if it's at a place where there's a TV camera, we're going to have a picture of his face. Now, how are we going to know? The shadow account. That's the reason for the shadow account. What's happening here is every time you spend money, the shadow account goes down. Every time you add fare, the shadow account goes up. Right? Now, if you can add fare without using an add fare machine, then no record ever goes to OCL that you added fare. And all of a sudden, it sees the balance on your card is going up, but there's no corresponding add fare transaction. So it knows that you did something fakey with that card. When will it learn that? however long it takes for your shadow account to equalize with your actual Octopus card. In most cases, if all you do is ride the MTR, they're always in sync. If you buy Cokes, it takes a day for them to balance. So Octopus will wait a day, they'll see what happens, and if they don't see a corresponding ad fare transaction, your card goes on the blacklist and you can never use it again. Furthermore, they're going to catch you because they know exactly where you tried to use it. So yeah, you can get away with 1 day. What's the maximum you can put on an Octopus card? 500. Okay? So a thief that goes through all of this trouble, not only is he going to go to jail, but his maximum benefit is 500 Hong Kong. It's just not useful. In any case, nobody's ever done that, except these guys who bought the parts or who stole the parts from the warehouse, and they created this fake ad fare machine that wasn't online connected to OCL. And they kept adding fare, and they bought things in strange patterns around town. It was a gang of people, and they got caught really fast, but they wanted to catch all of them. And so they waited a few months, and the total amount that they spent during those few months wasn't that great. I mean, it's a few thousand Hong Kong or something, 10,000 Hong Kong. But it was the publicity of catching them was worth the loss, because Octopus had to make good on those on the fake transactions. Okay. Think about the shadow account. The shadow account tells all. It just doesn't tell it instantaneously. Any questions? If no questions, yes?
Yeah, I know that there's been some talk about peer-to-peer transactions.
Peer-to-peer Octopus?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that. And the way you could do it, though, is through a central server. Okay, well, as far as I know. Because otherwise, if there were true peer-to-peer between phones, like bump phones, then that would mean that the protocol would have to be known to the phone. The protocol is not known to the phone. The protocol for causing the card to change its value. That could be dangerous, it seems to me. But if you go through a central server, then it's easy. Because all the secret stuff is known to the server and not to the individual phones. These become just terminals. Yeah. So it would be neat. It would be cool. Anything else? If not, my proposal is to let you go home. And equally important, to let me go home. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about credit card other than Octopus?
Sure.
Offline credit card.
Yes.
Because the shadow account
Yes.
enables Octopus to pay offline, but what if on the airplane? So we use your
Yes.
credit card
Right.
to buy TVs or buy stuff.
Yeah. So originally, all credit card transactions were offline. When they were done on paper, and I told you about this embossing machine, where you put your credit card in and they would create this slip and they would write how much you owed and you'd sign it. The credit card company didn't know about that until those slips actually got physically sent to them. And so they didn't know how much credit you had used. And so you could go around town basically spending a lot of money and overdrawing your credit card account. Problem there, of course, is you would lose all your credit then. I mean, you'd be banned from that particular card. So there's always a delay. If you have an offline transaction, it takes a certain amount of time for the data to get to wherever the clearinghouse is, or the clearing process. Yeah. If you have any questions not about Octopus, ask me next time on Sunday at the beginning. Otherwise, you're keeping all of your classmates here who may not be interested in the answer to that question. All right. Take off.